Tonight I'm at the Dodge Theater here in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I'm at tonight. Day 2 of my Common Sense comedy tour. Went well last time. I want to thank everybody in Denver for coming out. This week we're also on television looking at the housing boom and bust with economist Thomas Sowell. Phoenix is an appropriate city to be in while we talk about all of this. In April of this year, Phoenix, Arizona was the first major American city to have home prices fall 50%. Since the housing market peaked in 2006, a 50% loss. Yesterday on the program, we looked at the economics and the politics behind the boom. Today, we look at the bust. The housing bubble has been growing for years. Americans, spurred on by government and Wall Street promises, dumped all they had into their homes, their largest asset. They thought their house would be worth more than they paid for it. Prices were skyrocketing until the bust.
This is just one of thousands of properties across Florida where the real estate crisis is changing the sunny landscape. Homes built but not selling, development projects stalled and warping, and waterfront properties offering silhouettes of palms and rusting rebar.
Properties like this have stalled in development or haven't been developed yet is because of the dramatic change in the market.
I'm desperate. I'm literally one of those desperate people.
This is my first brand new home that no one else has owned, no one else has lived in. I don't want to lose it.
Thomas Sowell, scholar in residence at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, explains in his new book, The Housing Boom and Bust. When did it all start?
2006, housing prices went down for the first time in more than a decade, and they went down by a huge amount. Prices to go down by 20% in 1 year.
And that was only the beginning. The following year, it would go down another 20%, and then another 20%. San Diego is an extreme example. In 1 year, the average price of a home in San Diego fell by $200,000. A $500,000 home in January was $300,000 in December. But you still owed the $500,000 on a $300,000 home. People's mortgages were underwater. They owed more on their mortgage than their home was worth. And following the law of unintended consequences, the people hurt most by the bust were the ones that ownership was supposed to help.
Blacks, Hispanics, other minorities, those are the people who were hit hardest. They were most likely to have to go into default. Unless the person got a zero down payment loan, they put some money into the house. And now when time comes when they can't pay the mortgage, they lose all of that as well as having to move out.
But why did people who didn't meet the standards set by banks, subprime borrowers, get loans in the first place?
It was the regulators who insisted that the banks lend money to people who didn't meet the standards that the banks had always used. And so this then forced the banks into finding new ways of lending to those people. And so therefore, instead of having a 30-year fixed mortgage with a 20% down payment, which most of the people that the regulators wanted them to lend to didn't have any 20% down payment.
Some politicians were the biggest cheerleaders.
When the boom was going on, Barney Frank was very willing to say publicly that he was pushing. He said, we haven't pushed enough to get them to lend more, to do more for affordable housing.
In a November 30th, 2006 interview with PBS Nightly Business Report, Barney Frank was asked, what's your top priority?
Affordable housing is the single biggest one. We have a terrible housing crisis in this country, and I think we now understand that housing is not simply a social good, but it's an economic factor. The biggest difference people will see when we take over from the Republicans is we will reverse their policy of basically letting any affordable housing stock dwindle and not building any new stock.
Now, after the whole thing blew up, then Barney Frank is saying, this is all due to too much reliance on the market, that what we needed was more regulation. Well, yes, you could use better regulation, but the regulation that we actually had was itself at the heart of the problem.
How was Wall Street involved? And how did this spread around the world?
The financing of these mortgages was nationwide and even international. In other words, a Wall Street firm would buy up, say 1,000 mortgages. And then they would issue bonds based upon the value or assumed value of those 1,000 mortgages. And then they would sell them. And they would sell them not only in Wall Street, but they'd be sold in China, Japan, London, wherever. And the people would buy them because the ratings agencies said that these were solid securities. But of course, there was not enough knowledge available for people to know whether they were safe or not. And the companies whose solvency depended upon the value of these mortgages, many of them end up being insolvent, and the taxpayers are then stuck with bailing them out.
Now, with rising unemployment and the economic ripple effect, home foreclosures have spread from subprime borrowers to prime borrowers. Nationally, foreclosures have doubled from last year, hitting a record high in the first quarter. A fact the Mortgage Bankers Association said is, quote, sobering, but not unexpected. Next, bailouts and stimulus. What have we learned? And have we learned anything? Plus, what does the future hold? Tomorrow on the Glenn Beck program. You don't want to miss tomorrow. Part 3, what have we learned? I don't think we've learned anything. We're doing it all now. We've pushed it back up to the government. Tomorrow, Thomas Sowell answers that question. What does our future hold? Is America's toughest sheriff versus the federal